Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I am back much quicker than usual, but that is because we have some wonderful news. Despite the delay in the decision from the Supreme Court on the evidence in the Alexee Trevizo case, as soon as I posted my video, of course, it came out that the Supreme Court has set oral argument for this case in September. We will be getting to hopefully view this oral argument as it happens or potentially right after. We'll see how it's set up for this one. It should be available to the public, and I intend to set up a stream or something for us so that we can watch and analyze this. It's going to be a monumentous moment in this case. Now, obviously, you're always cautious with the law. You're always worried that something bad could be happening for you. And as we just discussed in the last video, were the justices very divided? We didn't know what was going on with the delay exactly. We just knew that it didn't come out in the time that it definitely could have based on when it was submitted. So we were going through those possibilities. And right before that, this will play into it as well, the video was about how far maternal privilege can go based on how bad, for lack of a better term, the findings of facts came out in this case when you compare it to some of the evidence that was available to the judge to make sure that the findings of fact in a very important case are true to the evidence. When you are racking your brain thinking about all the arguments that are going to be made and worrying about everything, and you kind of get to that point, that's exactly when it hit me that no one wants to be delusional or cocky, overconfident about anything. But maybe, just maybe, this isn't due to deep division over these issues. There is a slight possibility that it could be because of the arguments put forth by the defense and the issue with a lot of the things stemming from this suppression, the wrong findings of fact, the fact that none of the exceptions have been really answered for well. And that's going to get into some of the arguments here. We're not going to deep dive into all these arguments because we are going to be doing the oral argument series. We'll go through basically everything that there is going to be. We're going to go through all the points that are going to need to be hit. We're going to go through the arguments from both sides on those points, and then we'll go through all the questions that we can try and think of that the justices might ask the people arguing this. And the people who are going to be arguing this more than likely will be the Attorney General who filed on behalf of the state to the Supreme Court, and the person for the defense will likely be Gary Mitchell because from my recollection, he has significant experience before the Supreme Court, specifically in criminal matters of the Constitution, if I'm not mistaken. So he's very well equipped for this. This should be a battle of the minds in front of a battle, or in front of like a panel of minds rather. And so this is a very, very monumentous moment for this case because there's a lot that rides on the decision that comes out of this. There's clear precedent in New Mexico. And from what I've heard from people who tell me that they're from the state, is that they don't feel as though the state has done an adequate job taking care of children in that state. That's the sentiment I hear. And so, is this a time for justice? Is this a time for these wrongs that people may feel have happened to be made right finally? This is potentially possible. Either way, really what has to happen for the defense is they have to put up or shut up at this point. They're going to have to back their arguments. And that's what we'll touch on here really quick. The easiest thing to start on would be Miranda. Not that there's not arguments to be made, but the first thing that I would like to point out is, if you guys remember 2 videos ago, when we're talking about the judge's finding of fact, we pointed out that the judge literally says effectively in custody when it comes to Alexee. And there's also a lot of question as to if what was said to Alexee could ever amount to an actual interrogation. This comes down to boiling down to the basics that we've been talking about since the defense has tried to suppress this evidence, and we dug deep. So many videos on this channel. Everyone's seen exactly how these arguments have formulated, why they're weak, why the state's arguments are strong. And that's why I say the defense kind of has to put up or shut up on these things, because they've been able to kind of weave their way around the facts. And if the facts are framed as they are, strongly enough, with enough conviction, how can the defense really hold up to it? They have characterized the time that the alleged quote unquote interrogation or confession was made when the police first enter Alexee's room as an intimidating moment, an intimidating presence of those police officers, because they blocked the door and because they had guns and because of all these things. They're trying to paint a picture of a very coercive environment to make Alexee's statements fit the threshold for interrogation if someone didn't think they could leave. Unfortunately, if Alexee technically didn't think she could leave, you still have to find the way to make that legal burden, because no one put her in custody until they actually did. And multiple statements were made, not only by Alexee, but other witnesses. None of them provoked by police officers. So the defense is going to have to argue the two prongs of Miranda: custody and interrogation, because there's a clear moment that Alexee is in custody as far as the police officers' statements go. They say she's not free to go. I think we should take that as custody, but that's just me. So if there's a clear moment of custody, I don't see how the defense is starting off on a very strong leg to begin with. These are the conversations that will be had when each side has their time, and it will start state, defense, and then the state will get a rebuttal. I believe it'll be 30 minutes each and a 5-minute little rebuttal back from the state to close it up, since they are the one appealing. And with that, in those times, the justices can ask questions. They can interrupt you. It's a conversation. It's not you giving closing arguments or opening statements and everyone's quiet and listening. The justices can press you, especially depending on who they are. And so some are calm and laid back, but really it's a rapid fire conversation that makes you need to be on your toes and know the law like the back of your hand. You cannot have a fumbling moment and not know the exact wording you're trying to get to, because that exact wording could potentially be what you need to make your case in that point. So really, this is a very intricate, very sophisticated part of the law, but it's also very reminiscent of just straight up debating. And it's pretty awesome, because in regular court, in regular trial and hearings, you don't really get interrupted. It's not as conversational. You can be asked questions by the judge, but judge isn't trying to interrupt you or anything like that, and trying to cut you off at the pass and get their answer satisfied before you get your point out. And so that's where this gets a lot more interesting. It's not heated per se, but you have to be ready. You have to be ready in a different way than you would for a regular hearing or trial. Will Gary Mitchell have the gas in the tank to be able to prove custody when these justices will have reviewed the evidence extensively? They will see how the police entered the room. They will see how the doctor acted. They will have seen the conversation with the police officers and the doctor before going in the room, and be able to press both sides on whether or not custody is there. The state will get pressed too. Did the doctor wait? Did the doctor try to collude with the police? Was the doctor trying to get a confession? Those could get pressed on the state. But I do think that there's pretty valid explanations for the doctor's actions and everything that happened that night that don't feel evasive in the way that the defenses may. So with that, we'll move on to privilege. The defense has gotten extremely lucky because they have barely had to account, if at all, really, for the exception to the rule of privilege in this case, the medical privilege exception, Rule 11504D4, essentially saying any statements regarding potential child abuse or neglect are not privileged in New Mexico. So the defense really needs to get over the hurdle of that exception, and it's never properly been addressed, because why should the doctor have to invoke privilege for someone that they also have acknowledged the doctor was able to report? It doesn't make any sense. In the motion hearing, before the judge took 9 months to blanket suppress everything without referencing any case law, the only real explanation given for this was that the doctor still should claim the privilege on behalf of the patient. It's just been explained like that. There's really, and that she never waived privilege, they say, even though there is a waiver that was signed. So it's just never really been accounted for. And the defense has admitted in that hearing the duty to report. The judge asked him point blank, Mr. Mitchell, what about the duty to report? And he acknowledged that. But he said that's as far as it goes. Then the privilege needs to be re-invoked, and they can't help the police in any way. That's essentially the crux of the argument. But I don't understand why privilege can be re-invoked after a crime of alleged child abuse or neglect has actually been brought forth against the defendant / patient, Alexee Trevizo. These are the questions that will likely get asked by the Supreme Court. And we're going to go through all of them, point blank period. And I'm going to try and make it as digestible as possible, because this could get very lost in the sauce if I just allow myself to ramble on and on about these things. But they're going to have to get over that exception in the fact that the doctor could call the police. And why can't the doctor show the police where Alexee is and let them take it from there, but also have Alexee agree to the medically necessary transfer that Alexee needed once the doctor, no thanks to Alexee, was able to figure out what actually was going on with her. I think everything that happened was extremely fair. I think that the doctor was under the impression that they had to speak to the police officers and that they had to have Alexee transferred. Really, the doctor wasn't hoping she would be arrested that night. When you read into what the doctor says to the police, you realize, oh, the doctor thinks Alexee's going to get arrested and does not want the police to take her while she needs life-saving care potentially, because Alexee might not have delivered the placenta. The doctor didn't go and ask medical questions about the placenta in front of the police officers. She didn't start interrogating Alexee about anything that happened in the bathroom. And the doctor actually stopped the investigation that Rosa was trying to do when interrogating Alexee in front of those police officers. If anything, the doctor did everything perfectly. So I don't know how the defense is going to account for this. I think the state will have a pretty good way of framing the doctor and making the hospital look like a victim, which brings me to a point that is very important. Currently, New Mexico, and specifically Eddy County, the county that this alleged crime took place in, is considered a medically underserved area. New Mexico specifically is seeing an exodus of healthcare providers, leaving many New Mexicans without adequate healthcare within a certain area. And this case is the exact definition of that. Alexee needed a specific kind of care that wasn't fully available at Artesia General Hospital unless they had potentially known the details before or immediately after Alexee giving birth to be able to know about the placenta and what may have still been happening for Alexee, they may have been just fine because according to HT, he delivered a baby that was hanging halfway out of the woman just weeks before Alexee Trevizo came into that same hospital. And that baby, at the time of HT's interview with the detectives, was alive and well. So, with knowledge, these medical providers in Artesia General Hospital are able to complete things and save lives. But in certain medical emergencies, in cases like Alexee's, because these aren't large cities, as you can see, it's rural. New Mexico is not able to have the medical infrastructure needed for that type of immediate care. And people like Alexee are transferred via the helicopter to a city that does have care, just like Alexee was taken from Artesia to Loveless in New Mexico. With that, the exodus of healthcare providers is linked currently to the increase in their insurance. And the increase isn't coming from anything that the doctors are technically doing wrong. It is from the higher cap of damages for medical malpractice lawsuits that have come from New Mexico. And what is unfortunate is, as we see in Alexee's case, there's a wrongful death with medical malpractice filed against Artesia General Hospital, which is already going to cost them for their insurance and their public reputation, all the things that come along with being blamed for the death of baby Alex and having to defend themselves civilly. So should Alexee even be shut down and the civil case, dismissed at some point, which they are apparently, we don't know for sure because no movement has happened. They may be waiting at the request of quote unquote Team Trevizo for this decision to come down from the Supreme Court. Because if the Supreme Court throws out the evidence in the Alexee Trevizo case, it could potentially strengthen their civil case which they're not going to do a blanket suppression just like the district judge. But if they don't throw out any of the evidence, if Team Trevizo basically gets their butts kicked at the Supreme Court, their civil case is in serious danger. Supreme Court decision really holds a lot of weight in their case. They're the ones who admitted that when asking for it to be paused. But with these facts, knowing the facts in the Trevizo case and knowing that there's a wrongful death lawsuit launched at the hospital, maybe it gives a little credence to these healthcare professionals saying that these medical malpractice damages are what's causing them to have to leave because they can't afford to practice in the state. So, just a little bit of food for thought that's very interesting and pertains to this case in many ways, in my opinion, because really, how I see it, I don't know how on earth you could blame Artesia General Hospital for the death of baby Alex at the very least when he was found in a trash bag and no one knew about him. That's just crazy and tying up the system, in my opinion. But I'll get off my soapbox on that. Back onto the topic of privilege before we get into the criminalized pregnancy outcome for a moment. The privilege will also need to be explained by the defense, in my opinion, just off first glance here, because if you guys remember back to the hearing that was live streamed, there was a question as to if Rosa's presence impacts the privilege. And it definitely should, because Alexee's not a minor, and typically the standard for the third person in the room to not waive privilege in New Mexico is that the person has to be medically necessary. It calls into question why the judge maybe pulled in the fact that Rosa and the stepfather were on Alexee's paperwork as emergency contacts to potentially strengthen or understand why the medical privilege was going to be applied despite this third party being there. And an emergency contact, I don't think meets the threshold for medically necessary, which the the standard for that is you must think like someone who maybe is a high needs adult. And though they are an adult, the person who is with them, their caretaker, things of those nature, someone who can interpret for someone, they literally have to be there with the patient, and it shouldn't impact their privilege because they have some sort of protected characteristic. And that's the nature of why a third party shouldn't waive the medical privilege and the spirit behind that in New Mexico. And so I think that the reach that has happened with Rosa is going to be very apparent because it's been a huge issue this whole entire time. And I can literally prove it to you because when Rosa is talking to the detective after she's been separated from Alexee because she needed to be kept out in front, she went to go make these calls, and Alexee's getting transferred in the helicopters coming. Basically, the detective says, "So what did she come here for?" And Rosa says, "Back pain." It's on the footage from the detective's body cam. That inherently shows that Rosa is a contradiction to waiving this privilege, even though she was there. She straight up went and told the police officer, and no privilege should apply to Rosa. She knows exactly what happened to Alexee. Should the statement about back pain be in? Because let's say they suppress all of Alexi's statements, but Rosa's don't get suppressed. Well, now we've learned that Alexee was there for back pain because we had a third party there. And Rosa has already said that to the detective. And the back just so happens to be the exact opposite place from the stomach, if someone wanted to make that argument and make it look extra suspicious. And essentially, Rosa's presence needs to be accounted for. Because Alexee is in high school, is not going to meet the threshold for being 19 at the time. She's not even like fresh into 18 to where you could maybe try and say, this person just turned 18 a week ago and went to the hospital with their parent and something happened. This person been a legal adult for over a year at this point, and I don't care how immature that person is, that comes with certain responsibilities that when we willy-nilly start throwing those out, you're going to call into question a lot of other cases and precedent that has been set. And so we can't just make a special rule for each and every part of the evidence in the Alexee Trevizo case in the way that it kind of felt like the district judge did when doing a blanket suppression. And by all analyses that I've seen or done on this case, a blanket suppression is just not coming back. It's not coming back fully suppressed on every single thing. I just can never see that happening. It contradicts everything. It would have to rewrite precedent for every part of this. And so with that, we have to understand the final piece of the arguments that the defense has put forth. And if I had to put money on it right off the bat, without getting to go through every filing again as we're going to and everything, my first initial instinct is the biggest thing that the defense is going to have to account for is how it's been classified in their arguments and in the briefs submitted on their behalf, that baby Alex's death is being categorized by them as a criminalized pregnancy outcome. And for that, we have to understand what that even is in the first place. The furthest extent, like the best example I could give you is imagine someone in a very abortion restrictive state having a pregnancy for a baby that they do want and experiencing some sort of medical issue that causes some sort of miscarriage. And the hospital seems to think, and the police seem to think, whatever, that this person caused that abortion and they didn't. And now they are being criminalized for something that is some sort of potential medical anomaly or something that could be very devastating to someone who not only just lost a pregnancy that maybe they want, but also are being charged criminally. And when you compare a situation like that to someone who was open and honest with a hospital or medical provider and was being criminalized for something that they weren't trying to hide or or cover up what we're genuinely trying to get help in that situation, you can kind of question and start to wonder, why on earth would everyone from the defense's team essentially be willing to go on record to call something like this a criminalized pregnancy outcome when, by all accounts, this was a full term baby? And what really needed to happen that the state side did when they were filing for the Supreme Court was put forth the argument and highlight for the record the testimony of the medical examiner at the arraignment for Alexee. Basically, the testimony said that the medical examiner found signs that baby Alex was gulping for air. And when you think about trying to say that the outcome of the pregnancy is what's criminalized, you also have Alexee saying that nothing was breathing and nothing was crying. You have an autopsy saying the exact opposite. And instead of getting any medical care or assistance, which was only a pull cord or a door open away for Alexee to have done, that didn't happen. You start to make the case that this wasn't a criminalized pregnancy outcome. This was the criminalization of what Alexee did with a full-term baby that was alive, according to an autopsy report currently. It's not the same. If Alexee did give birth to a stillborn baby and had asked for help and still had the police called on her, that could be an issue. Why would you blame Alexee? Maybe she genuinely didn't know she was pregnant, because if she swung that door open and said, I genuinely thought I had to have a bowel movement and a baby came out of me and it doesn't look like it's alive, what do I do? And then they called the cops on her, I would be questioning the motives of those medical providers. But according to the facts in this case, according to the hallway footage from the hospital itself, the proof speaks. Many people were offering assistance from outside that door. The nurse, Alexee's own mother, and yet nothing was done by Alexee to capitalize on that help. And to further that point, one could say Alexee showed a reckless disregard for the life of baby Alex, which was proven by the reckless disregard Alexee had for her own life by not being honest with hospital staff about the medical emergency she just faced. If giving birth to a full-term stillborn baby, there could be a medical issue that she's suffering from as well. You could almost make the argument that, man, she really must have not wanted anyone to find that baby if she didn't even care what happened to her as she sat there bleeding out in a hospital bed, not mentioning what just happened in that bathroom. She didn't ask for help for the baby, and she didn't ask for help for herself after. Which reminds me, the person who showed up to the bathroom about 40 seconds after Alexee went in was also the one who desperately said to the police officers months later,
"We went for help. We went for help."
Saying that they went to them for help, when according to Rosa, all she thought Alexee had was some back pain, could be a little suspicious now, couldn't it? Thank you so much if you made it this far in this video. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them down below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I do genuinely enjoy the conversation. If you're interested in following cases like the Alexee Trevizo case of child, please subscribe, as I'll be covering it all along the way with a legal focus. It's your Friday. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.